Hey everybody, welcome to Stamp-A-Faire 2018. This is Betsy Veldman, and in my class we are going to be watering our flowers. But we don't even have to go out in the summer heat to do it. We can stay in where it's cool, and we're actually going to be just playing around with some watercolor and some flower images. Alright, so first of all, we are going to take a look at the mini palette that was included in the Stamp-A-Faire kit. There's a tin, and then you have 5 mini pans. 4 colors plus a black, and I have mine already put together here. I put a little piece of magnet on the bottom of each of the half pans. These are just half pans, and these are Daniel Smith watercolors. They're really good watercolors, high quality colors, and they're going to be great for mixing, and it's going to produce a really fun, bright, vibrant palette. So once you have your palette all ready to go, we are going to play around with mixing colors, and while we do that, we're going to create this band that can act as a little wrap for the palette tin. And these are all of the colors that you can create just by mixing the 4 colors in this palette, and you'll see as we go along how this works. So I did this in a sketchbook a while back, just to play around with the colors, and you can see each row is a mix of the colors, the paint colors from the palette. So this row is a mix of the blue and the yellow, and here's the blue and the yellow in their purest form. And then as I go through the row, I just add a little bit of yellow, a little bit more yellow as we go along to my blue, or vice versa. You can start with the yellow and just add just a real tiny hint of blue, and then you keep going and add a little bit more of that blue every time as you're mixing, and you work your way across the whole spectrum of color mixes across each of those different combinations. So now let's use this concept to color in all of the squares of the grid of our wrap. You can see I'm starting the first row with pure yellow on one end and pure blue on the other, and I'm going to gradually mix the two as I work my way across the row. The second row, I'm going to start with pure magenta on one end and pure blue on the other, and repeat the same process to fill in all of the different shades of those 2 colors. I'm going to continue this process until I've filled all of the squares of my grid using all of the different color combinations from the palette. Now we're going to use our new palette to paint some pretty poppies. I'm going to take the main poppy image from the Painted Poppy Stamp-A-Faire set, and I'm going to stamp it onto some watercolor paper using soft stone ink. I would suggest using some high quality cotton watercolor paper versus an inexpensive paper, as you'll have better results with the layering and blending. So I'm going to start with the large oval petal on the left side of the flower, and I'm going to give it just a nice wash with a really deep orange color from the palette. I'm going to go ahead and add some shading by dropping in some of the magenta paint down in the throat of the flower and along that left or bottom edge where you would have some shading because of the other petals. Now I'm going to go over and move to the right side of the flower with this kind of curved petal, and I'm going to use the same process. I'm going to start by giving it a wash with some of the orange paint, and then dropping in some of that magenta where in the deeper, more shadowed areas of the petal. Now we're going to paint this petal off on the right, and I'm going to use a little bit different shading technique. I'm going to put a wash just in the bottom portion of that petal and drop in a little bit of the magenta color over the orange. And then I'm going to wash my brush, dry it off, and use this drier brush to pull some of that color over into the unpainted area of the petal. This creates kind of a highlighted area. So since we don't want to work on petals that are next to each other while they're still wet, we're going to move on to the stem and leaf area. We don't have any green in our palette, so we're going to have to mix some using the blue and yellow. I'm mixing up just kind of a mid-tone green, and you can see I'm also going to drop in some deeper green up near the bloom of the flower where the stem would be shadowed while it's still wet, and I'm going to let those colors just blend together. You can add some shadow on the side of the stem as well using the same technique. Then I'm going to go ahead and paint the leaves, and I'm just using a nice wash of kind of a mid-tone green, And then I'll be dropping in a little bit of the deeper green while it's still wet, just to add some shading. The reason we're skipping around on the petals on the flower is because we don't want to paint petals that are right next to each other while they're still wet, or the paint will just bleed together. But our petals are dry now, so we can go back up to our bloom and continue with painting those petals. I'm going to work on the large petal in the background right now, and we are going to use a wet on wet technique. Poppy petals can tend to be kind of transparent and papery, so we're going to try to achieve that look. So I'm starting off by painting with just plain water. Then I'm going to go ahead and drop in some of the orange in the deeper colored areas of that petal. Down in the throat, around the other petals where they'd be shadowed, and also up along the top edge. Then I'm going to go ahead and wash my brush and dry it, and with this drier brush, I'll be going in and filling in all of those little messy edges that are left white from where the water didn't flow when I painted with just the water. You can see I'm also going in and dropping some of that magenta color down into those deeper shaded areas. You can also take your brush and kind of pull some of that color towards the center if it didn't migrate far enough with the water on its own. We're going to use the same technique now and move down to this bottom petal. We're going to have more concentrated color at the base of that petal because that top edge is facing us and kind of catching the light along that top edge. So we want the deeper color to be down along that bottom edge. And again, I'll just be using the orange and dropping in a bit of the magenta. And again, you can kind of pull that color up with your brush if it doesn't travel far enough on its own. So before we move on to the next petals, you want to make sure that those are dry first. So they're dry now, and I'm going to continue on painting our last two petals. This one here, I'm going to use the same shading technique that I used on the small petal off to the right, where I'm going to give it a wash on just the lower part of the petal, drop in some of that magenta, and then use my brush to kind of pull that color up to the upper part of the petal. This gives just a nice highlighted area at the top of that petal. Now we're going to move over to the left side and finish our final petal using the same technique again, giving it a wash just down in that deeper part where it's connected to the flower and kind of shadowed, and then pulling that color. Now it's time to add a few details if you'd like. I'm just going to add a little bit of deeper shading down along the top part of that lower petal and also along the top edge of the back petals. I like to add just a little bit of detail where those petals are kind of overlapping in the back and also along the top edge to give that kind of ruffly look that the petals of poppies have. Now when that's completely dry, we can go in and add our yellow center. Now we're going to work on the background. You're going to want to look at your swatch that we created and choose a color. I'm going to use a teal color by mixing the blues and the yellow. You'll want to mix up quite a bit of this color so that you don't run out while you're working on your background. Your mix should be pretty watery because we want the color to be a little lighter and not overpower our flower. So we're going to be using a wet on wet technique. So what I'm doing here is we're going to be working in sections. You can see I'm painting with plain water in our first section, and I have that nice and wet with a nice shine and a sheen to it. I don't have water puddling, it's just nicely wet and glossy. And then I'll go ahead and drop in that color with my brush, just kind of using a dotting motion. Then I'll clean my brush and dry it, and you can see how I'm using just the tip of the brush to go around and clean up some of those ragged edges. Then I'm going to continue doing the same process until my entire background is filled around my flower, working in sections. You can see I'm also dropping in a second color, a little bit of yellow, which will add a little bit more interest to the background. You can also add some deeper colors right near the flower where it would be a little bit shadowed. Just make sure to do it while it's still wet. Our flower is finished except for the little stamen detail in the center. I'm going to pull out the black paint from the palette and just use some really light brush strokes with the tip of my brush and also some dotted areas to fill in. So our flower is all finished, and I hope you enjoyed this project. I've really been having a lot of fun exploring the world of watercolor in the last year or so, and I just find it so relaxing and fun, and I hope that you've learned a little bit. If you haven't picked up watercolor before, or even if you have, maybe some techniques that you can use to color some of your stamped images and just relax and have fun with it. I hope you're enjoying Stamp-A-Faire, and thanks for watching.